Well, today on Media and Society, we take a look at the role of the media when it comes to providing the country with unbiased information about the elections. Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society. I am your host, Naledi Molewa. This is, of course, the show where we take a look at the intersection between the media and society. As usual, of course, the show really is not complete without your input. So feel free to give us a call over the next hour. The number is 011-714-0661. So here's the premise for our show this morning. The media is essential to democracy, and a democratic election is impossible without media. Simultaneously, political parties have an explicit right to provide the electorate with information regarding their attributes, their political agendas, and even their proposed plans. Besides meeting directly with members of the electorate, candidates and parties accomplish this task through campaigns via the media, right? Radio, television, print media still have a massive role to play in providing the country with unbiased information about all parties. So as we wrap up 2023 and head into the election of 2024, what are the rules of engagement between media and political parties? And do you, as the viewer, feel as if you are getting enough information to make well-informed decisions as you go into that vote next year? Well, to have that discussion, we are, of course, joined in studio by Nomshado Nkosinkulu, who is the head of communications at Media Monitoring Africa. Also joined by Dr. Sanele Kamete, lecturer of communication and media studies at the University of Johannesburg. On Teams, we're joined, of course, we will soon speak to Mr. Mwagisi Sibanda, who's GM at the IEC, editor-at-large at Scroller Africa, Everson Luhanga. We are also joined by political party brand analyst, Mr. Dr. M.K. Zwakala, and Rejumwa Lucy, who's the executive director at SANEF. A big discussion. Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you.
I want to start with you. Let me start with you, Sis Nomshado. Why is it important that the media is aware of the rules of engagement as we get into elections?
I think, sitting where we are right now, particularly with the vulnerable environment we find ourselves in, and also the complexity of next year's elections, there's quite a lot of new introductions that citizens are not really much aware of. And the mere fact that we've got digital media, which is also an influence in that regard, and where we are sending everyone is obviously the primary source, which is media. So it's important to understand that as much as we're there to ensure that unbiased reporting is happening, but at the same time, there's a huge threat of disinformation that will be going on, and mitigating that and combating that. And I think the whole idea of civic engagement really needs to come into play, because as much as it's about highlighting the electoral parties, highlighting what the big shots are saying, it's also about understanding where are the citizens, understanding the local discussions, and bringing them to the table of understanding as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, is that a lot of journalists will tell you that as we get closer and closer to elections, what happens is there's almost a scramble for attention, right? A lot of journalists will tell you that politicians that are, for the most part, quite inaccessible at this time become very accessible. So talk to me about the responsibility that the media has at this time, particularly in your view.
I think, in my view, the media is at the center of our lives, especially the public, which means it needs to ensure that it exposes the issue of elections and how we can go about more or less educating the public. What normally happens is the media trying to cover what is happening, trying to cover politicians and campaigns and all of that, but it's sort of like leave behind the idea of leaving politicians and going out to the public and educate the public. Because for me, if you are going to cover someone who is a politician or from a political party who's trying to inform us about when we should go and register and all of that, for me it's just political coverage.
Yeah.
It's not educating the public. So, and there's a tendency that I've seen already of the media not going out there holistically, meaning you only find mostly the broadcast media going out there, and the radio sometimes is behind. Most of the times, newspapers don't see the role they should play, because we have people in rural areas who still are reading newspapers, who need to get this information and really learn, not get a manifesto of a certain political party, but learn about what is expected of them, and informed, a beautiful analysis should happen, and through the media.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point. There was the argument that has been made over and over again about whether or not media houses, particularly as we get closer to elections, cover political party individuals, or even if they actually analyze the manifestos, right? We need to get into that at some point. But I'm going to bring in Dr. Zwakala for a moment. A good morning to you. You're a political party brand analyst, right? You know that in the next few months, what you're going to see is every political party, and now even independent candidates, really pushing their name, their brand. In your view, what does that look like, and how does that relate to how then they interact with the media? Is there something that can go wrong there in that relationship?
Morning, Naledi, morning to colleagues and your viewers, of course. Yeah, so I think it's a critical time. So I woke up to an article by Peter Bruce, I think headlining, "The media is dumping down along with the state." And I must say it's quite commendable of you to really be having a look at yourselves. So this is going to be very important, because prime media will be the platform where all these political parties will hope to get coverage, right? But I think we need to get a good balance between free media, publicity as it were, versus paid media, and how these parties are hoping to present their brands to the public, right? So in that instance, you get that smaller political parties that don't necessarily get coverage, they do feel underdone, they do feel disadvantaged. So I think ethical reporting from media, covering everyone and anyone that is contesting, I think that is what democracy needs, right? So there are certain bigger parties that do tend to get coverage comparative to others. It is somewhat an unfair advantage, right? So I think when it comes to, especially the new parties, that they need the media for awareness purposes, and in the long run to build their brands. The responsibility as well, though, does lie with the political parties themselves, right? So as long as media, as much as media has a responsibility, I think the parties themselves should hold themselves accountable to say how are they presenting, how are they building their brands internally, how are they presenting their attributes, their plans, their objectives to the media, and how do they sell that to the public.
I mean, is that not a difficult thing to do when you've got essentially, 4 or 5 very dominant, and I'm going to stay with you, Dr. Zwakala, for a moment before we bring Mr. Molisi in, but you've got, 4 or 5 dominant sort of political parties in the country. Does it not become difficult then to not just focus on their voices and bring in the other many voices? I mean, at some point we were talking about 80 possible political parties on the ballot paper. I mean, how do you even give them a fair voice on the media when there are so many options now?
Those are the consequences of democracy. Now, I mean, anyone can contest. Independent candidates can contest, and I think, to be quite fair, there are, 3, 4, 5 bigger political parties, and I think now this is a disadvantage to the smaller ones. But I think it still remains the responsibility, especially the public broadcaster, to say, okay, who are the movers and shakers? Who are the big political parties? Because I think as much as I don't agree with anyone and everyone contesting, because if I start a political party, I can't and I've got 20 people following me, do I honestly expect to be covered in main media? I think that would be too ambitious. Right? But I think. Yeah, so I think to be quite fair, as I said earlier on, the balance between this free media or / publicity and paid I think it really needs to be looked at because if you're going to be giving others free media, I think even smaller parties should be warranted that space for brand building purposes.
Yeah, well, listen, we're going to continue having this conversation up until 10 o'clock. So if you'd like to give us a call, please feel free to do so. The number is 011-714-0661. What do you want to see the media do in the run-up to these elections in 2024 so that you have a clear understanding of the decision that you need to make as we get into that election? Reggie, I'm going to come to you. Let's speak about what SANEF is going to be doing at this time, because one of the things that we've seen in previous elections is the need to actually protect journalists at this time as well, right?
Yeah, look, my lady, I mean, the last elections, the last municipal elections, we saw how journalists were badly treated. We saw how journalists were harassed. We saw how, on the part of the IEC, which ultimately they apologized for, how some journalists were, frog-marched out of a voting station in Soweto. We saw how in Mpumalanga, journalists, were harassed, and in Limpopo as well. So that's a conversation we've been having with the IEC. It's a conversation we have had for long. It's a long-standing relationship that we have with the IEC. But journalists, the issues around intimidation, harassment, bullying, and all of that, besides elections, we deal with that throughout. It's sort of it has become part of the narrative for the media. But I think the IEC itself, it's open to saying, look, we'll engage with you as a media. We'll also engage with political parties to educate them on the work journalists do and how they should be afforded the space to do their work. And that journalists, when they come and work, they are not an extension of any politician or political party. Yeah. They are there to do their work.
Yeah, Reggie, I want to stay with you because I think that certainly around election time, the South African National Editors Forum would be receiving a lot of the complaints from journalists, right? You can give me a few examples of issues that you remember being raised by journalists and a few examples that we can actually go back to and go, right there's a red flag, that's what we can't repeat again.
The last election, I'll go back to that one, the 2019 municipal elections. It was largely an issue of access. Remember, as journalists, we go out there to get the story. We go to polling stations. We want to report from there. So the one challenge that we realized was that the IEC has all these temporary workers who have been employed, and those people have not really been educated on where they can allow journalists and where they can allow journalists. I mean, the example in point of the one in Soweto where police had to be called in just to remove the journalists, not inside a polling station, but outside the school grounds. I mean, that was just pathetic. So that was one example. In Limpopo, it was the similar example where journalists were removed out of the polling station. So that's one. Secondly, there's the issue around transparency and access to information, where we always say in an election like this, we need access to information, and information can be withheld from us, particularly when we need to know numbers, when we need to know regular and constant updates from the IEC. So, yeah, so that's the second one. The other one was the issue for us around training, which already the IEC has addressed that we are training a whole lot of journalists. As you may know, that there has been the Electoral Amendment Act, there's aspects like the Party Political Fund Act and all of those. So that training is undergoing. We have covered about 5 provinces already. So yeah, so that's where we at. But the first two issues, those have been the two big issues that we faced.
Okay, I want to bring it back to the room here. Nomshado, I'm going to come to you and say, okay, in your view, when you look at how South African consumers of media look at particular media houses, do you think that there's a concern that there might be bias on the part of media houses leaning or skewing towards certain political parties?
I mean, historically, we've seen how, when it comes to credibility, when it comes to how certain media houses have kind of fallen when it comes to public views or perceptions of credibility when it comes to bias reporting. That could be a big threat because, number one, we've seen how it's easily something that could be kind of mobilized online and translates to now a media problem. Now, mere fact that, you know, citizens also have direct access to certain journalists. So I'm moving my hat out as my personal views and I'm putting my hat on as journalists. That little thread of line of understanding that you yourself standing there, you are seen as the producer of information.
Yes.
Once I start bringing my own personal views into the discussion, I need to ensure that it is deemed and it is stated as my personal views.
And I hear you, I hear you. What I'm asking you is, do you believe that people trust that journalists can do that?
I mean, with all honesty, credibility or low trust in institutions has been a problem, particularly even with media. So in terms of rebuilding that trust, that is certainly something that's an ongoing mission, I believe. Currently, right now, you could say to a citizen, for example, would you go to media as a source of information, for example? And you'll have different views. And that's because over the years, we've got different issues that were coming to life and coming to, especially when it comes to political parties or certain leaders being affiliated with certain media houses or certain journalists, for example. So that is an ongoing thing that we shouldn't push behind the bar and say, actually, it's not a problem, or actually, it is a problem. It can potentially even become a bigger problem.
Can I ask you the same question?
Yes, I think for me, the media should be careful. Because one of the advantage of the media is that one of the things that the media can do is amplify voices that are already large out there. We know big political parties that we have, and it tends to do exactly what she's saying, amplify those voices without necessarily making sure that the ground is almost even. So it sometimes go over and above. I mean, the affiliation that she is mentioning of certain political parties who have been on the ground, they tend to get more coverage. And allow me to revisit a study that I did a while ago on the political coverage within the SABC radio stations, and quite alarming that a few political parties that are sort of like big players, they tend to get more coverage. I understand he said you can't start a party tomorrow and get 5 followers and then you expect
and then you've got media coverage.
You get to get media coverage. But I think we need to balance that, because everyone wants to be on your screen, Naledi. And if you are tending to have the same people on your screen, it worries the public, because you have a way of setting the agenda in a way when you do your political coverage. So I think you need to be very careful, or the media needs to be very careful. And of course, there are issues. I think the IEC should have a little bit of a budget so that and a plan of action to say who is covered, when, how, in which platform, and all of that, so that there is sort of like fair coverage and people can see a representation. I think going to 2024, we need to see these new players. They say the 2024 elections are groundbreaking elections. Let us see the small parties now getting airtime, so that we can see that the media is trying.
Yeah, especially at a time where you've got then our democracy really starting to shape itself and say, well, you have civil organizations, you've got independent candidates. Some of those stories could be particularly very interesting stories about how some of these organizations were formed, what it is that they saw in their community. Those are the kind of stories that even the people that live in those communities possibly really want to see. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Of course, remember, give us a call if you'd like to. The number 011-714-0661. We're talking about the media's role in the run-up to the 2024 elections, right? What is it that you'd like to see us do as we help you make your decision for next year? How much coverage? What kind of coverage? What are the questions you have for those political parties at these times? Welcome back. So you are still watching Media and Society. Media literacy is vital to ensuring that media coverage of elections is effective in informing the electorate and that the media is itself held accountable also. So media literacy development really not only involves empowering consumers, but also educating information holders as well, including government officials and election participants to, of course, improve their understanding and relationship with the media. So we're having a discussion this morning about whether or not you feel that the media is giving you the information you need to be hearing in the run-up to these elections. We are, of course, joined by Moagisi, who's from the IEC. Let's get straight into it. Moagisi, thank you so much for joining us, and a good morning to you. I want to go here. Simple question. The IEC actually has written down the rules of engagement for the media, correct?
Well, actually, that is governed by ICASA, and ICASA is the one that regulates how media should cover political parties especially, and do so fairly. For us as the IEC, media partnerships are very, very important because media is a big stakeholder in terms of the work that we do, especially when it comes to civic and democracy education. And that's why we partner with the SABC, who, like us, have a similar mandate to educate the public. And we also work with other media entities as well as social media platforms to ensure that we curb things like misinformation and disinformation, and ensure that we reach as many South Africans as possible so that South Africans go to the polls empowered with the right and credible information.
Yeah, but let me ask you this, though. I mean, what are the limitations that media houses need to be working with? Because, we've been talking about it, how essentially you've got the challenge where you've got, say 4 or 5 big political parties that a lot of the time get all the coverage. You've got these new players now entering the space. How does the media balance all of that?
Well, it does become difficult, and I think, coverage also needs to be proportionate to the size of the political party. Right now, Naledi, we've got just under 600 parties that are registered. Of course, not all of those parties will make it onto the ballot. As you know, we have a number of criteria that will ensure that we have people who are serious about what it is they want to do for South Africans, and therefore they have to pay a registration fee, etc., and they would get that back if they get a seat. But I think it will become challenging. We've got independents also entering the space, so how will that impact media coverage and fair media coverage for all who will be seeking to represent South Africans, who will be seeking to speak on behalf of South Africans and represent their priorities and aspirations.
Moagisi, what is that ballot paper going to be looking like? I mean, at this point, there's so many questions around just how many political parties or candidates we're actually going to be seeing on that ballot paper, right? So can we talk a little bit about that? Because that's essentially the one thing that the media needs to frame itself around. How many voices do we need to be giving a platform to?
So, Naledi, we are in the process, obviously, of planning for that ballot, and that will, again, as I said, really depend on the number of candidates, and that is still something that's to come. As you know, we're still going to enter our candidate nomination space, and then we will obviously do the ballot, but we are planning for that. We've sort of started speaking and looking at, will it be one column depending on, how many people we need to put onto the ballot? Will it be a double-sided? But that's where balloting education will become very, very important in our next phase of civic and democracy education, which will commence next year, closer to the election, because we really will need to educate the public on how to use the ballot that will be there. And we do produce a mock ballot. You remember in 2021 we had a mock ballot, so we'll be utilizing then what will be our mock ballot in that last stretch towards election day.
Okay, I'm gonna speak to some of I want to speak to SANEF for a moment, and then we'll come back to you, Moagisi, because you as SANEF are going to be getting all the complaints in the run-up to the elections. What's the one thing you want to be hearing from the IEC as we move into what is going to be a hot campaigning season, Reggie?
Look, I mean, if we can get the kind of speedy resolve to whatever issue that we raise, and the IEC comes back to us as speedily as possible. During the last election, the kind of complaints that we sent to the IEC and that were public, we expressed our dissatisfaction with how long they took to really come back to us and then resolve those issues. The Soweto issue is a case in point, and the IEC ultimately apologized for that. But I think, as Mwagisi says, and as you rightly say, it will be one of the mostly hotly contested elections ever. So it will be busy. Media will try to be all over, will try to be as busy as well to cover as much as we can. But we need that agility on the part of the IEC to really respond to us with the speed that's required.
Yeah, Dr. Zwakala, I'm going to bring you in here because you obviously spend a lot of time analyzing how political parties brand themselves and how they speak to the media. Is the IEC really giving us too much to work with here when you've got essentially so many political parties? I mean, even the engagement between the IEC and the media and who gets the fair coverage. Do you think that we're being blunt and honest to our viewers?
Yeah, I certainly feel that the IEC, as much as they're faced with quite a number, I read this morning that they're expecting something like 90 parties, which would require 2 separate ballot papers. But I think certainly that they can definitely do more. But another point I want to raise, that I think so much needs to be done by these political party brands before we can get to the media. Now remember, the media is just the medium, right? So there are, and I'll give you 2 examples. So there are certain parties that work hard on how they relate to the electorate, how they build their credibility, how reliable they can be, what they stand for, and what they seek to achieve. So that is constructed within parties before they get to the media. So by the time they need to get to they get to the media, they then need to communicate what it is that they stand for, what their truth is, and what their identities are. And then they link there, and they then need the media to communicate who they exactly are and what they stand for. So it is that point where the media then is needed, because people will vote for parties because of the relatedness issue, because of the resonance issue, because it speaks to them in whatever identity element you're talking to. So I think most parties, so people print T-shirts and caps and get a stage and a mic and say, we're starting a political party. Who are you? What do you stand for? What do you have to offer to the electorate? If that has been clarified, if that is coherent, then you take it to the media to communicate it. Two very interesting brands that are not necessarily getting the coverage. In fact, they didn't start off with media. They spoke to people. Get Mackenzie's party, Patriotic Alliance.
Yes.
But those guys, they speak to the emotional sense of their electorate. I think only after then they've done the groundwork. Then the media then followed, because there was something that is coming out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And freedom front class to an extent. So there's a certain section of the electorate that really resonates with these with these party brands, that it would happen the other way around. Then the media would start following them. So I'm saying that, so before we can bash the media, these political party brands, they need to know who they are, what they stand for internally, be coherent internally, and then rely on the media to communicate that to the public in the hope that that will result in them getting votes. I
want to ask one critical question, and I'm going to ask it to everyone, even Mwagisi, right? And I think maybe I should bring it back to Mwagisi and ask you this question, Mwagisi. In your view, how much media coverage is actually given to manifestos? Not brands, not personalities, manifestos, Mwagisi.
I think, Naledi, let's also remember that The mandate of the IEC, as much as we make ourselves available to speak on various topics and we partner with media and we actively take a role because it is our mandate to educate. So we want to make sure we influence the space as much as possible. But we don't manage how the media necessarily covers political parties. We have an electoral code of conduct that's directed at political parties and about how they should behave to ensure an environment that is conducive to free and fair elections. But we work with SANEF, for example. We've been doing media training around the country, and it still continues because, as I said, we want to enable and influence the space and ensure that media are also adequately trained and prepared for all of the changes that are coming in NPE 2024, so that together we're transmitting the right information that is credible. But we rely on organizations such as SANEF also to help manage the space in a way that is fair, in a way that is, doing the right thing for South Africans to prepare them for elections every time.
Yeah. Again, though, I'm going to stay with that question. Nomshado, go ahead.
So Media Monitoring Africa has been monitoring media coverage since 1994.
Yeah.
So we've been monitoring in terms of topics, in terms of voices, in terms of which political parties are getting most voice. And when it comes to manifestos and political parties, they've always been at the largest in terms of coverage. And particularly when it comes to, for example, local government elections, where you'd expect perhaps societal issues would be maybe
at
second or at the top.
Yeah.
It's still the same scenario. Also interesting enough, when it comes to voices, citizens ranging around 4%. Election,
right?
Whereas this is centered around them,
the electorate.
Exactly. Yeah. So those have been the interesting, I think, percentages and trends that we've been seeing over the years. And I think the challenge has always been, who are we supposed to shine light on? And at the end of the day, it goes back to that engagement. It goes back to the understanding. And I think I'd like to highlight what one of the guests has said, that the political parties themselves have a role to play outside from bashing media to say that give us platform, give us voice. But at the same time, the media needs to also allow the space to really reflect to the electorate.
Yeah, I think this is what I'm trying to get to, right? Is that in the run-up to elections in other countries, perhaps even in the US, you'll see debates, for instance, right, between political parties or political heads, right, where there'll be discussions around, what would you do with the sugar tax? What do you want to see done with gender-based violence? What do you want to see? So we're actually having policy discussions, right? Are we doing that as South African media? Are we asking these politicians what their policies are that they're putting on the table?
I think, Naledi, it's more, it is ticking a box in a way, especially when it comes to the manifesto, when politicians have to present, because we don't do much. I have picked up where the media will visit communities, it will have like debates, but really I am interested in the public participation in the media. I mean, my study focuses on that, and I'm liking what she's saying. We are just going out there as the media. We are not necessarily probably asking the critical questions, and I don't see much of the representation of every political party in such discussions. I don't know if they don't RSVP or they don't have money enough to show up in these, or these discussions are positioned to disadvantage those small political parties, because in those debates, as much as they do happen, we see them having few political parties. And for me, I think the media is not doing justice to the public when it always covers probably the few big political parties. It's like you are not showing me or telling me what the other political parties have. I'm always knowing these few political parties. But of course, I will agree with my colleagues to say the political parties, they really need to clear the dust and have their houses in order.
I think there's something to be said, though, about whether or not we're communicating the policies of each political party, particularly as the media. Are we questioning in the run-up to these elections what their policies are? Not their politics, not their personalities, what their policies are. And could that actually change how the electorate then acts in the upcoming elections? Give us a call, 011-714-0661. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. You're still watching Media and Society. We continue our discussion this morning asking you, what is the role that the media needs to be playing in the run-up to the 2024 elections? What is it exactly that you need us to be doing to help you make your decision as we get to that all-important, highly contested election next year? I'm going to bring you in, Dr. Zwagala, because I asked a question before we went into the break, and it's such a difficult one, right? Because essentially, in the run-up to the elections, it's easy for the media to be swayed and even taken by, I suppose, the storm of the political personalities, right? In your view, has the media in previous elections actually given enough attention to the policies of these political parties, what their proposition is to the electorate?
Yeah, so Nalit, I think again, I think when it comes to communicating these political parties, I don't think there's time and space as far as main media is concerned. So I think, to be fair to the media, really, you'd need to dedicate an entire hour per political party for them to clearly articulate their policies. Because second point is, so in the previous election, I think what you can then do is just, as a political party, present the selling point, your unique selling proposition to the public. You don't really have the time and space for these policies. Again, that responsibility of articulating and explicating party policies, the responsibility lies with the political parties themselves. Second point, that I think the political party policies are largely intact, to be honest. However, the implementation of those policies leaves much to be desired, right? So on paper, as I'm saying, largely political parties, they're appealing on paper. But I think the South African electorate has moved beyond policies. People want practical solutions to their daily problems. The ruling party, for instance, I don't think anyone can fault the ruling party's policies. Conversely, you get certain parties that claim to be for everyone and anyone, for all races and whatnot, but yet these parties are associated and are protecting the interests of certain sections of society. So there's incongruence there between political party policies and what political parties actually do.
Yeah, I think that what we're still skirting on the surface here. I really want to stick with this issue, Dr. Zwagala, because I feel like we can certainly speak about how political parties have their policy, but the implementation isn't there, and you make a fair point. But it's important that the voter knows what the policy is, right? So in a country, for instance, where we have high levels of gender-based violence, surely a woman who is a victim of gender-based violence wants to hear that political party X says perhaps we need to put guns in 16-year-olds' hands. Like these are things that are important, right?
Critical things to address, and I think the quagmire that political parties find themselves in is that now that we've got big problems as a country.
Exactly.
Unemployment, crime, so on and so forth, and all these political parties will obviously need to align themselves to what may be solutions to our social ills. So I don't think we can necessarily pin it to political parties, but I think as a society generally, how do we address our social ills? Yes, political parties are a vehicle, but I think we also need to have an in-depth assessment of us as a people, right? Why do we have such high crime levels? Why do we have petty crimes? Why do we have such high unemployment? And secondly, what if the solution does not lie with political parties? These are the conversations that we need to have, right? What if the solutions do not lie with the political parties? A friend of mine in UNISA wrote a piece around why do we not depoliticize governance? Because the democracy allows it, right? So our hope, it seems now, is that it's political parties who are but a certain section of society. So we need to have solutions, because I think people have been largely failed thus far, right? So do we really hold political parties only accountable, or can we find other solutions beyond political parties?
Yeah, you see, what's interesting about what you're saying, Dr. Zwakala, and I'm going to bring Mwagisi in back again. What's interesting about what Dr. Zwakala is saying is that if the issue is that we need to then think about South Africa finding other solutions beyond political parties, that doesn't help the IEC then, that says we're trying to encourage South Africans to come out and vote, right? I mean, certainly we need to be saying to South Africans, go get your ID, go and vote, but they need to trust that, you know, they can trust the system, right?
This is a very, very important thing, Naledi. As you know, our research that we do with HSRC, but also, you know, triangulated with other research organizations, is that the trust issue is really what is informing the lack of participation, the amount of distrust and disillusionment. And we've actually just concluded our voter participation survey, which is a survey we run ahead of each election to gauge voter perceptions, and it influences our operations in civic and democracy education. And the disillusionment persists, Naledi. The lack of trust, and the people are saying that they feel that their vote isn't going to make a difference. But of course, as the IEC, for us, participation is important, because democracy is a long-haul project. It's not an instant gratification at all times. There are things that can be done quickly, but there are definitely areas in society that we need to address. Gender parity being one of them, which is what you spoke about. A lot of women are going out to vote, 55%, but we do not see that translated on the party list, etc. How is media going to cover that and ensure that we elevate those issues into the public sphere?
Yeah. Mwagisi, I'm going to stay with you a little bit. Let me ask you this. One of the things that happens during an election, particularly after we've voted, is then everybody keeps a close eye on what happened to the ballot papers. Where are they? Where are the, you know, the boxes? And then sometimes there'll be a story about, well, boxes were found on the side of the road. How much work is being done by the IEC then to really be transparent about what happens to those votes as they make their way to the counting center?
Yeah, transparency is one of our critical values, Naledi, and we have seen those stories coming out. It happened in the last election. Some of them were really old stories, as Media Monitoring Africa will also say to you, or just something that has gone awry. But to ensure South Africans, really, South African elections are extremely secure, are really as secure as they could be. So if there are those stories of boxes as we have seen in the past, nothing ever leaves a voting station without being counted. And, with the technology that we've employed with our voter management device, etc., every result of a voting station gets shared to the media, to the public, as well as to the IEC simultaneously. Nobody gets it first. All of those results are uploaded immediately, and we've got party agents at voting stations who sign to what the results are, and various observers. So nothing that you may see, and we obviously do not like that kind of thing. It's not something we guard very strongly against, and we have guidelines about how our material is rolled back from voting stations and taken back to our offices. But you can be assured that counting always happens within the voting station. It does not happen anywhere else. And South Africans and the media yourself get those results immediately in real time, along with the IEC, to ensure transparency and accountability.
Okay, Reggie, I'm going to bring you in here from SANEF's point of view. You certainly sit as the media then from various media houses and look at all of these elections. One thing we saw with the last local government elections was what Mwagisi is talking about, right? These VMDs, these voter management devices. We've started to digitize the way we process these votes coming in. Does that build trust or not build trust? Because what we cannot deny ourselves is that we did see some challenges in the local government elections. Some, not a lot, but some challenges with these digital systems.
It's important, particularly in any elections. Trust is important. I think Nomshara alluded to it earlier. One of if you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, it will tell you that government, it will tell you that media, there's a low trust levels. The IEC is always working on credibility and such. We need to highlight those. And I think the media, the last time, as you rightly pointed out, we did highlight those. And those are some of the responsibilities that we have on our side as the media, where we need to have the information and educate the greater public out there about these devices, how they work, what's the purpose, how they can use them, and all of that. But we live in an unequal country, a country that's so unequal that those with less access, with less education, with less access to data and all of that are not so well informed about some of these. So the education, the publicity of teaching people about this doesn't only lie in the media, it doesn't only lie in the IEC, it lies in each and every South African to say, let me go out there, let me educate myself on how this thing works. And the idea that Naledi media should do this, media should be there, media should be at each and every corner and nuke. I mean, that's just not possible. Media, the landscape of media has changed. Media is faced with its own challenges. We 10 years ago we had 10,000 journalists in this country, and now 10 years later we've got less than 5,000 journalists. And things are changing. We've got a whole lot of challenges in the newsroom, but the education aspect, it needs to go further than saying media and IEC, where we say, here's this device, how does it work? How do we teach a Gogo, Kuno in the corners of Limpopo and all of that about this?
You know, what you've just said is so important, right? To reach people where they are. I think, Reggie, I think just we're going to wrap it up, and perhaps I'm going to give you a final word, Nomshado. Your word right now to media houses, and you know, Reggie has talked about reaching Okoko where she is, right? Then I think of local radio stations.
Exactly.
What do they need to be thinking about?
I think we need to highlight, number one, that we're sitting within a digital divide. So digital literacy, media literacy is at the core of a gap that we need to address. And second to that is to realize as well that as much as we've got mainstream media, but we've got community media, and that ecosystem needs to come together to ensure that we are reaching Abogogo that are sitting in those areas. But my biggest highlight here would be, we need to realize that information is at the core here, access to information. You touched on policies, and one of the conversations I think that has been happening is, does a political party's website include their policies, their constitutions? Is it visible enough to show who are these members that are within that? And also realizing that as much as information, it acts both as a catalyst of empowering a citizen, but also this is something that can be manipulated, and easily so that it could be consumed as such. So I think it's one of the things that we need to kind of look at.
I want to give the IEC the last bite here just to close things off. Marisi, your final words. I mean, your words to all media practitioners at this point about the role they need to be playing in the run up to these elections, and how you want to see them support the electorate.
I think we definitely would speak for fair coverage and the kind of coverage that helps South Africans make very clear decisions. Next week is voter registration weekend. All voting stations will be open. Again, we're speaking about the digital divide. We've got an online registration platform, but for those who are not able to access that, your voting stations will be open 18 and 19 November for you to go and register, to go and update your addresses, etc. But fair coverage and the kind of coverage that allows all of us to play our role in the country of educating and informing the voting public.
Marisi, thank you so much for speaking to us, and that's how we wrap up the show. Thanks so much to Marisi Sibanda, who is GM at the IEC, editor-at-large at Scroller Africa. Everson Luhanga was supposed to join us, wasn't unable to though. Political party brand analyst Dr. MK Zwagala, Reggie Mwalisi, who is the executive director at SANEF. Thank you as well to Dr. Sanele Kameta, lecturer of communication and media studies at UJ, as well as Sis Nomshado Nkosinkulu, who is head of communications at Media Monitoring Africa. That's how we wrap up the show. Thank you so much for joining us. We're back with you again next week Sunday. Have yourselves a fabulous day.